Right. So shall I
Yeah, you can
proceed?
go in.
So, I did not know what to expect and who would be watching and joining and looking in and listening in. And I thought I'd keep it fairly open-ended, and there's so much to talk about. And I would encourage you to interrupt and talk and ask questions, and because there's so much that, I could talk about. Um, and happily, because, this is my passion. So, but what I wanted to concentrate on, I wanted to just tell a few anecdotes, just to give you an idea of what got me hooked on the whole research thing. And my biggest concern was how can I share something that's valuable to other people. So I'm not sure how much can be of use to each one of you, but I'm hoping that just what I have to say will make you think a little bit further about how you approach your research, and what you might not be doing or could still be doing. It's always worth revisiting. I always say to people, go back, revisit. I have made mistakes with my research, but every time I go back, every day, I take my ancestors to bed with me. I sleep with them, and I live their lives in my head. And then I go back to my notes, and then I realize, oops, I made a mistake, or I got the wrong person. And it's amazing. The more you go back, the more things you discover that you didn't notice before. And as your knowledge increases, it's incredible. These things come together. And it's so special that you almost do believe, and maybe it is the case, that the ancestral spirits are actually guiding you and pushing you along. And they're playing with you. But at the same time, they're watching, and they're pushing you in a certain direction. And they're helping you along. And that's such a good feeling. Even today, after all these years, suddenly my father's cousin sent me photographs of her father and my great-grandfather before he died. And I had never seen these pictures. And I never thought that after all this time, after all these years, today I would get photographs, and to see them today was, every day there's a new discovery. It never stops. So this is the wonderful thing about research. It's an ongoing journey, and it really does take you places. So what I wanted to start with was just, I have a confession. I'm not Catholic. I grew up Anglican, but my confession is that I have committed 2 cases of gentricide that I can think of. Gentricide is a fancy word for killing old people, like femicide, genocide, gentricide, gentrification. So I committed gentricide, I think. And I'm going to tell you, this is by telling you, I will feel better, and maybe one day I will be forgiven for what I've done. But I started very young, and that has given me an advantage over most people, because most people that do genealogy are retired. So Chandra is also an exception, and I find that fascinating, because most genealogists are people who have finally got more time, and they've grown older, and now they've started thinking about the important issues. So yeah, it's very rare to find young people who start so young. And I made my first genealogical notes when I was 10 years old. I still have them. And but the reason why I was asking questions is because I was really confused. I was a very confused child, because my background, it's simple. I was born, I should first confess, right? But very quickly, I was born with a very unusual first name and a very unusual family name, my surname. Upham is rare, scarce soos hoendertande. There are very few. We were one family worldwide, and there are more Uphams in the United States than there are in England, where the family originates. But it's rare, rare, rare. So I've only met one real Upham outside of my immediate family in the flesh. But that wasn't the problem. The problem was being born in the Orange Free State in a place called Welkom, and really not feeling very welcome. Because when I went to school, I had absolute hell. I was always treated like a foreigner and told to go back to England. Or my name and family name were always mispronounced. The teachers reveled in mispronouncing my name and making fun of it. So in short, I developed a huge complex. I became very defensive about my identity and who I was. And I watched my parents, and of course I was in absolute awe because my mother spoke this double language. She never could speak pure English, and she could never speak pure Afrikaans. And I loved my mother for that. I loved her dearly for being who she was. And she always said, you know me, I can't change. And I'm not going to change because this is who I am. And of course, my mother, you know, living in the Orange Free State on the gold mines, all my mother would say was, oh, I just want to go home. Ek wil Kaap toe gaan. Ek is 'n Kaapenaar. Ek is 'n Kaapenaar. And this made a huge impression on me as a child. And of course, you know, everything we did was Kaaps. My mother was Kaap. She refused to eat pap at braaivleise. She said, ek is 'n Kaapenaar. Ek eet nie daai kos nie. And so it was, you know, we had our breedies. We had our breedies and our breedies. And then my grandmother would arrive with my grandfather. And then there was this mixture of English and Afrikaans. Both my grandparents were half and half. So it was all very confusing. And then my mother was always saying, we are English, we are English. It's like, Ma, why do you say this? Oh, no, we are English, we are English. So my mother had a past that she was also not hiding, but it wasn't a happy one, clearly. And of course, it was compounded by the fact that my father was orphaned. And that's very sad too, because he was only 2 years old when his mother died. And his father died when he was 6 in a gold mine accident. And my grandfather was saving people who had been injured in a rockfall. And he went down the second time, and there was another rockfall, and he got hit, and he had his spine severed, and he was brought to the surface, and he died 3 days later in the East Rand Hospital. And he was able to call his 4 children to him. Their mother was already dead. He appointed the guardian, and he died drinking champagne after he told his children to grow up respectably. So all I had as a child was one photograph of my granny, Hester Basson. And I must tell you that I am her spitting image. I can stand naked in front of the mirror to make sure that I'm not my granny. Because everything is the same, except, well, let's not go there. But really, I am my Oma uitgeknip. I am Hetty Basson incarnate. I think I have come back. She lives through me. I do believe it. So that was a huge inspiration for me. Was I would hold this one photograph of my grandmother and say, I'm going to get to know you. I want to know more about you because you are an enigma, a total mystery. So, okay, now my confessions. I mentioned I moved around a lot as a kid. So I went to 10 different schools. And finally, after many years, my father resigned from his job with Anglo American, and we returned to the Cape. And I say we returned. I had never been to the Cape, or I'd only been there for holidays. But we came back, and my mother was the happiest person ever. She finally came home. And we moved to the Strand to be near to my mother's parents. And of course, we are 25 grandchildren on my mother's side, which is another shock, because most of them are Afrikaans speaking, besides our particular family and one other that is more English speaking. So once again, it was strange to have to communicate with my grandparents, with all the grandchildren speaking English and Afrikaans, and my grandparents speaking both, and dear mekaar, very dear mekaar. And also there was hostility sometimes between the English and the Afrikaans speakers. So this didn't make things easy. But anyway, living in the Strand was the best thing that could have happened to me. The Strand at that point had the oldest population of retired people in the whole country, I believe. All the widows and the widowers were in old age homes in the Strand, especially Afrikaans families. So I had a field day. I used to go to all the ouerhuise, and I used to go and talk to people that were related. And it was very sad because I remember going to one old age home, and all the old tannies would come up and say, has he come to see me? And then the nurses would brush them away and say, no, he's not here for you today. And the disappointment on their faces, it was so sad. But anyway, I had heard that my grandfather was Yapi, very interesting name. Certainly for an English-speaking person like myself, Yapi was not the kind of name you would want your grandfather to have. But Yapi was my grandfather, and Yapi had a cousin called Lottie Hubert. And of course, the connection was through my great-grandmother. And at that point, I'd already managed to retrieve a huge portrait of my great-grandmother, Polly Holloway, which I used to have hanging above my bed. And of course, my whole family thought I was crazy, including my mother. But I persisted. And I got to the old age home, and here was the woman was already literally in, I suppose, the old age home's ICU. She was on her last. She was not going to make it. And she was in terrible pain. And the nurses actually, the staff at the old age home said, look, I don't think you should see her. She's on her last. And I just said, look, I've got to see her. This is my grandfather's cousin, and I insist. I want to see her. And just please let me see her. I don't have to speak to her, but just let me see her. And after much begging, she let me in. And there was Lottie Hubert on her last, in pain. And I went up to her and I took her hand and I spoke to her and I told her who I was. And all she said to me was, "Hoekom kom jy nou eers?" Well, I didn't know what to say. I was only 14, 15 years old. What do you say to somebody who's dying? Like, why have you only come now? It's like, I couldn't have come any sooner. I mean, if I had known, I would have come sooner. But how blessed I was to be able to actually get to see her before she passed on. But Hoekom kom jy nou eers really, really haunts me to this day. But even more haunting was the fact that when I walked in and I saw her, she was the portrait of my grandmother. Once again, uitgeknip. It was like seeing a ghost. It was not frightening. It was just wondrous. It's like, oh my God, this is Polly Holloway incarnate. This isn't it's the same person. So I had really felt as if I had seen a ghost and communicated with one. And sadly to say, she died the next day. And I think I might have contributed to the palpitations and the excitement. I might have just pushed her over the edge by visiting her. So I am guilty. I feel that I might have, hastened her death. So that's my first confession. And my second one is even more, I think I'm more culpable, more guilty. I had discovered that my great-great-grandfather, that his youngest brother, his descendants were all on the other side of the color line. So this was during the apartheid years, and we're talking, I was at high school, so it was just before the Soweto riots, so yeah, the Strand, I was at Hottentots Holland High School, all white, and the colored school was opposite us, and all colored, and this is how it was. And of course, my family, my grandmother, they were very, very touchy about the color question. And of course, the more I asked, the more they went silent on me. And it became really difficult to deal with my grandmother. But I discovered that there was a whole clan of the family that were on the other side of the color line and living in Athlone and, what was the other place? Bridgetown. So I went there. I had my little car. I was a student at that point. I had told my mother I was going. My mother was not happy. She thought this would cause further problems with the immediate family. And it was the time of the school riots, so it wasn't very safe to go into a non-white area. But I persisted, and I took my sister with me, and and she wasn't so happy to go, but we thought, safety in numbers. I think it's the best thing I could have done for her, my sister, for myself, and for the rest of my research life. So I went into Bridgetown and I met Irene Jazz, who was Daniel Tobias Prim's granddaughter. She had a portrait of my great-great-grandfather's brother. And I remember her standing there and saying, that dis my pa, hy was 'n wit man. And with all this pride, it was astounding. Something I had never encountered. I didn't know how to deal with it. It was just a complete new experience for me. And then, of course, she had told me that her one aunt had slaams oorgeslaan. So that was another shock. It's like, oh, now we've got a member of the family who's also not Christian, but they didn't know what had happened to her because her name had changed. So I'm still looking for her. So my journey's not over. I'm still looking for her because I don't know what her married name was. and the family lost contact with her because of the religion. But anyway, the youngest sister, it turned out that her daughter, the youngest sister was still alive, and she was in her 90s. Christine Norton. And so I whisked over from Bridgetown and I went to Christine Norton's place, and she was living with her daughter. She was also on her last. She had had a stroke. She was semi-paralyzed, and she couldn't communicate with anybody except her one grandson, who was called in because I had arrived and insisted on meeting her. And the daughter, she kind of stood around like, what the hell are you doing here? I mean, why would you want to even waste your time with us? But she took me in to see her mother, and the grandson arrived and separated photographs. And of course, I said, can we ask your grandmother who these people are? So we spent the whole afternoon passing these photographs. Eventually, poor Christina said, "Ek is nou moeg." But she identified 90% of those photographs. Wow, it was incredible. And she kind of fell back exhausted. And I'm sorry to say she died the next day. So this is my confession. But this is very bad. Don't do what I've done. But I think they will forgive me maybe one day. And hopefully I will meet them one day and we can kind of talk about it. But I think what I did made a huge difference to my family personally and to myself. And because I think my mother she couldn't handle the digging up of the family history, which would cause embarrassment with the rest of the family. And that was the hardest part, was how to keep on in spite of all this disapproval from so many people. But I'm here and, I haven't stopped. So, yeah, these are the kind of things that shape a person with your research. So, it's difficult for me to say, well, how can I tell you, to be a good researcher or to find things in other ways. I could only speak from my own experience. But certainly, it wasn't just going to the archives, and it wasn't just I think it's really meeting people and really getting to know your family inside out, your living relatives too, even if you don't like them. And I don't like any of my cousins. I have my second cousins are my best friends. My first cousins, they all hate me, and really we don't have a good relationship at all. So it's just one of those things. But it's also lonely, because you'll find that if you are the family historian, you probably are going to be the only one in the whole family. And I remember I used to visit old Margaret Cairns in Rondebosch, who was a very venerable, wonderful researcher, and she was one of my mentors. Because when I was young, once again, I went to see her to say, you wrote this article, I want to know more. And she was so special because she didn't look at me and as if to say, you little whippersnapper, you wet behind your ears, what are you doing here? Go away. She actually brought me in and took the time of day to show me her world. And I got to know her very well. And I remember at the end of her life, her husband already had dementia, and she was really having a hard time with him. And she gave me all the photocopies of the original baptisms of the Grote Kerk from the very start of the church. And she said, Mansell, I want you to have these. And, I was so honored. But I said, what about your family? And she said to me, my family? They don't care. Nobody cares in my family. Nobody's interested. Yes, that's the same for me. That is the same for me. And another little incident I had with her, one day, we were going through her de Villiers Palmer on all the Afrikaans families, and I opened one of her books and it was filled with red pen and corrections. And I said, Margaret, how can you do this to a book? And she looked at me and she said, I can. It's my book. And she taught me the most valuable lesson. That book is for reading. It's not for decoration or display. Use the damn thing. So write in it, correct it, add to it, pull it apart, but make it your daily aid, because that's how you get things done. And I was, also just making little pencil marks, keeping my books neat. No, no, no. Work through it, because it's a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. So that was for me another valuable lesson. Just really collect, 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 because one day it's going to come together. And also, with all the dead ends, I found the more dead ends I encountered, the more I started thinking bigger and saying, okay, if I can't find you, I'm just going to find all the people around you. I'm going to check the neighbors of the farm. I'm going to check the witnesses to the battles. I'm going to check each of those people until I get it. And then things happen. So whatever is evading you, it's evading you for a very good reason. There's usually skanda, there's usually something bad that has happened. And let's face it, this is maybe my most important message. Don't forget human nature when you're doing your research. You're dealing with people, and people are evil. They're good. They love, they hate, they do terrible things, they do wonderful things. So you need to bear this in mind. You are looking at records that are only telling a part of the story, and they are official records. So they are records designed for bureaucrats to control people's lives. They're not designed to make your life easy. So those records you must treat with the contempt they deserve. They are just records. And you should be critical of them. Like, where did these records come from? Who decided to have them? Why were they recording this? What was the purpose of this document? And then you can get more value out of that document. But now we get to another problem, because when I started, the archives in Cape Town were in Queen Victoria Street, in that beautiful old building, which is now the book, what is it called? The something of the book. It's like
lounge.
The book.
It's the center for the book.
Thank you. It's now called the Center for the Book. But that used to be the archives, and of course, prior to that, it was the old slave lodge, which had been converted into the old Supreme Court for the Cape Colony, and then into the archives. So now they've moved papers from the slave lodge to Queen Victoria Street to the new archives at Roland Street, or Roland Street. If you're real Cape Townian, you always have to say Afrikaans names in the English way, like Buitenkant, right? So my favorite, Buitenkant. So yeah, in Roland Street, so in the moving of the archives, documents have been lost, documents have been stolen, documents have been kind of misplaced due to negligence and even political agendas. So once again, you have to be very suspicious. You need to always say, where are these records? What are they? Who controlled them? What has survived? Because many of the records have not survived, not because they were hidden necessarily, but some bureaucrat thought they were no longer valuable and just got rid of them. So we are very lucky to have the records that have survived. And surprisingly, even under apartheid, there was no real government agenda to make records, the archival records as such, to disappear. Maybe government documents at the union buildings, but certainly not the old Dutch period and the British period so much. Although, the more we research, the more we're going to find that there are documents that are no longer there, and in some cases, even the old archivists, they used to organize exhibitions, and they used to pull out documents from different volumes, and then they would forget to put them back. So then be careful. So if you go to the archives, always double check that there's not a miscellaneous file where they've just put them all together in a separate file, because no one could be bothered to actually put them back into their original volumes. So this is how I've discovered lots of death papers, death estates, and inventories, and all kinds of documents that are in miscellaneous files, which are not in the usual mainstream documents. So very important. So when you go to the archives, you should, the archivists don't really know what's in the archives, and they are bureaucrats. I'm very helpful. Get to know them, because if you're on their right side, it does certainly make your life easier, because they will then tell you things which they didn't realize they know. Because, they just have these people coming in, looking for their family, and it's the same boring job every day. But if you take more initiative and go into that little room at the archives in Cape Town, and you you look at all the other catalogs and you start analyzing what archivalia they have, and just check out and talk to the archivists and start showing them that, let them know that you are digging deeper. They will help you, and you can educate them, because that's when you get the power. They start looking up to you because you are teaching them about what they should know already, and they don't. And of course they can't know everything, because there's such a wealth of information that's locked up in the archives. So yeah, simple things. Be nice to your archivist. Take them gifts. Sometimes it helps. Show them some consideration, but at the same time, show them that you are, you mean business. You want information, and show them that you're prepared to find out for yourself without them. And that's when they start getting worried, and then they'll come and assist you even more, which is great. So that's always a good thing to do. So now I'm just quickly looking at my notebook, because I made a few notes. I wanted to talk about so many things. Oh yes, I just wanted to mention, when I started out, there was no digitalization. There was no online cyberspatial. Now it's out of control. Yes.
It's going to switch off in less than a minute, it says.
Okay.
So let's just take that point in. Let's switch off and come back.
Okay.
Oh, but it is recording, so it's gonna give a few minutes. I'll just send you guys all a message to tell you when it's done. It's gonna take a few minutes before I can open the call.
All right. So just the point I'm making about, cyberspace, everyone's online. Now we've got all these, a lot of genealogists who suddenly have popped up, and they can go online and they can find all sorts of wonderful things. And this is really incredible. But there's a problem. We're being inundated with so much information, and a lot of it is crap.
And we can go on.
Okay, I'm talking so much now that I think you should stop me at some point, because I'm getting intoxicated on my own verbosity, right?
But I do want to know that last point that you said.
Okay, I was saying, there's so much online. So the digitalization is fabulous. It's wonderful. There's just so much that you can tap into, and I can sit in Japan now, and I can tap into records in Jakarta, which I do, and with the Netherlands, with the Rijksarchief. So it's incredible what's available to us. We are so lucky, but it doesn't help if you don't know what you're looking for, and this is the crucial thing. But you will know what you are looking for if you have collected and collected and collected, and if you have started asking questions right, from the start, and you keep on asking those questions. That's the only way you're going to get ahead. But the problem with the too much information is that most of us can't process it. We don't have the time, and often we don't even have the skills to do it. And processing information is the hardest thing to do right now. And this is the biggest problem I have. I do a lot of corporate coaching in Japan, and this is the hardest thing to teach people how to process information. But if you don't have a good general knowledge, you're not going to be able to Google very well. So this thing that Google's going to help you, don't even go there. It's what's in your own head that matters. Google's not going to. Google is a lot of information that other people have put in there, and some of the information is not good information at all, and not everybody is equally smart, I'm sorry to say. So you're going to have all kinds of information that you have to once again process and sort out. Die kaf van die koring, the whole thing of what's really valuable. But I have to fight that too now, because I have to really be strict with my time. I have to identify what I'm really looking for, and I have to switch off, and I've got to keep track. It's so hard, but that's what you need to do. Don't get caught up in this whole crazy thing of collecting information and just putting it into some kind of computerized family tree. I use my own notes. I'm old-fashioned. I'm sorry to say, that's how it is. I don't use a computer program. I use the De Villiers Palmer system, A, B, C for each generation, and I do work in family components, and I type them out individually, and I keep them on file on my computer. Yes, and I can do a quick search, and I know what's happening. But I don't use a computer program, because it controls my life, and I'm sorry, my mind is better than the computer. So, you know, and also by making those notes and revisiting them and always adding to them and subtracting and correcting them, this process is keeping your mind active. It's going to stop you from getting Alzheimer's, I hope. You know, ultimately, that's what I really hope, is that, you know, I'm not going to forget anything. I just want to be able to remember. But I think by keeping that brain active, that's the best way, because you're doing detective work. So you've got to always be one step ahead and asking questions, making connections. It's really the way to go. And you won't be sorry. And, you know, Chandra, you mentioned, you know, that I encouraged you to read Gothic script and to trust your Dutch and trust that you can understand some German and that you can learn quickly because you already have the advantage, because Afrikaans is related. I remember I read, this is another story, but it's an important one for me. I remember reading in Anna Beersiken. I met her once before she died. I didn't hasten her death, fortunately. But what a wonderful woman. What an incredible woman. She was sitting there, and I think it was Margaret Keynes who introduced me to her. And she just looked at me, and she decided I was interesting, and she spoke. And the first thing she said to me was, I still don't know who are the Hottentots and who are the Bushmen. This is my question. This is my life's question. I still don't have the answers. And I thought, what a wonderful thing for an old woman to say in her 80s. One of the most experienced VOC researchers. That woman did so much for this country's history. She's one of my heroes, absolute heroes. And but she, in her famous book on slaves and free blacks, which was groundbreaking at the time, I will never forget it, because I was at Stellenbosch University, and our history docenter, they made fun of her. They were angry that she had beaten them to the post and shown them up by doing real research. And but in her book, she mentioned Groote Katrijn, the first female bandit at the Cape. And I had already discovered that she was my ancestor, not once, but 7 times. So she was obviously important. Because if I have 7 descents from her, that means almost everybody else does, right? If you are Afrikaans speaking, colored, white, yeah, Cape. Anything, if you've got that old connection, we're all going to connect. So she had found the original court documents that banished her to the Cape, but they were so illegible that the ink had gone right through to the other side. It was a total mess. And she documented the number of the papers, but I think she just thought, I'm not going there, it's too difficult. So I found this hidden in one of her footnotes. And she said, well, you know, she was banished for an unknown crime. And it's like, no, she's not. In the court papers, it's very clear. There was a full disclosure of what had happened. But when I found the original documents, I burst into tears because I realized I'm never going to be able to read these. But guess what? I photocopied them. I carried them with me everywhere. And I'll never forget, because it was at a very difficult time in my life. I was just starting out. I just graduated at university. And by the way, I was the first of 25 grandchildren and the only one that went to university. So another reason why my cousins don't like me. So then I was waiting for Foreign Affairs to accept me, and I knew they wouldn't accept me because I was Engels, you know, and those were the times of the hardcore National Party in power. So I thought, okay, I'll go to Stellenbosch, do a law degree, study French, make it difficult for them to refuse me, you know. And it kind of worked, but I first had to work as a prosecutor at Bellville and at Kuilsriver, which was another big moment in my life, being the only English speaker amongst all the prosecutors. Anyway, so I took Groote Katrijn with me, and it was, as I said, a difficult time in my life. I'd lost my sister in a car accident. She was only 29. And I was moving to Pretoria, and I didn't want to leave my parents alone on the farm at Villiers-Dorp. And I was willing to give up my great dream of becoming a diplomat. And my mother just said, you will go, and that's how it's going to be. That's your dream, you're going. So I went to Pretoria with all my sister's stuff because she had died in the car accident. So I had all her paintings, I had all her pottery, I had all her household goods. And I took that and Grooteke train with me, the papers. And I remember lying on my horrible, I lived in Pretoria in Sunnyside, and in a horrible block of flats. And I remember lying on the floor and writing out the script letter for letter and crying many a tear until I cracked it. It was like doing the Dead Sea Scrolls. But once I did that, I can read any of that Dutch script now. So that was my, that was my baptism. That helped me to cross the threshold. And it wasn't easy, but it was so worth it. If you can do that, then you can get that breakthrough, because after that, it was plain sailing. Now I can go to the archives and I can read. Of course, it's difficult, and I have to sometimes refresh, but by constantly doing it, it becomes second nature. It's just another form of handwriting, and it's consistent and it's very beautiful. So you just have to say, I can do it. You have to say, if they can, I can. And, this is another philosophy I have. I live in Japan. And when I came here, I thought to myself, there's 120 million people that speak Japanese. If they can, I can. I can't be that dumb. I must be able to. If 120 million can speak this language, so can I. Sorry, it's not impossible. It's just a language. And it's just a writing system. And of course, I'm not fluent, but, you keep on until you don't even know how much you know. And that all helps. So get yourself some difficult archival stuff, transcribe it, check with other people. Nowadays, it's so much easier. I had nobody. I had to do this all by myself. So, yeah, I think I'm ready now to say, do you have any questions?